Hi, I'm Michelle Mercurio. Welcome to the show where we interview people who have ditched their plan to pursue their purpose. Let's dive in. I cannot tell you how excited I am today to have Aurora Higgs here with me. Aurora!
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. You are one of my favorite people in my local community, and I mean that in all seriousness. And you're such a mover and shaker, and you do cool things like this all the time. I'm super honored to be here.
I am super honored to have you here because every time I see you, I just light up because you bring such creativity, such energy, such authenticity, so many good vibes where you go. And I don't mean that in a I'm always positive kind of way. It's just like you are just fully you and making things happen. And I'm so proud to know you and I'm so honored to know you. So why don't you start off and tell us a little bit more about who it is that you are, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, to be determined, right? That's generally the take on it. But my name is Aurora Higgs. I sometimes go by Aurora Who Is She because it's a little bit of a play on the celebrity that I hope to have one day, but also just it's a constant reminder that I am unknowable even to myself. And so I love the idea of asking myself every day, who is Aurora today? Who is she? Who are they? What is Aurora? And so that is me. I'm still developing who I am, and I hope that I never actually know who I am because I hope to change pretty consistently and constantly and organically. So
I love that. So many people are not committed, and I don't mean that. And maybe so many people are committed and I just don't know, but I don't think that we all are comfortable with the fact that our identity is fluid and it can be fluid.
yeah, and it kind of should be because life events and circumstance are fluid, whether or not we want to admit it or not. And so we have to live up to our circumstances in a lot of ways and live into what's going on in our lives. And sometimes it just takes the person you were yesterday doesn't live up to the challenges you have to face today. And so that's where I am. I'm always trying to figure out who Aurora is. Among many things, Aurora is currently a scholar getting her PhD in digital media and doing that with a specialization in Black and Brown trans representation in media, what I call liberatory media, um, which is a little bit different than queer media because sometimes in today's age, there's a lot of what we call queer baiting and people who are just really interested in getting a queer topic in there to get a queer client base or stakeholder base, and it's really just performative. And so liberatory media is all about authentic and ethical representation of Black and Brown trans people for me. I am a community, I'm an activist and an advocate. Sometimes that changes depending on how much hell I'm willing to take on in my life and how vulnerable I'm willing to be. Being an activist takes a lot of vulnerability and it takes a lot of um, action, which is draining. And sometimes if I don't want to be a martyr to my own cause, which I do not want to be, I'm somebody who wants to enjoy the fruits of my labor. Sometimes I have to step back and advocate and consult. And so I'm a keynote speaker and a consultant on all things diversity, equity, inclusion related. I'm a educator on racial equity. I'm a burlesque performer.
I know.
am I'm right now working on creating merchandise, and you'll see I made this myself. It says protect Black trans femmes, and I actually just got the sample in today. So I'm trying my hand at making media and making products that really center trans people and being a reminder that we do exist in the mundane. We're not just these super exotic roles in television, and we're not just sex workers. Many of us are, and that's great. And some of us are only in sex work because the world is so brutal that it's the only way we can survive. And so there's conversation there. But I know on top of all of that, I'm also working on a podcast. I actually just recorded my first episode yesterday, and it's called. Thank
Congratulations.
you. It's called
What's it called?
Disrespectable Brunch, and so it takes the idea of respectability politics and it subverts it and says like, what does it look like when we stop feeling like we have to perform for society that says you have to conform, you have to perform and conform. And so, what does it look like to be messy and break out of that performance and like not being disrespectful, but no longer living up to those ideas of respectability.
Okay,
So,
so talk to us a little bit. Let's go there first
yeah,
because there are so many things that you said that I want to make sure that we hit on.
totally.
But let's go with respectability politics. Let's talk a little bit about why you are obviously taking a stand against certain pieces of it and
Yeah,
why it's harmful.
yeah. So, the thing about respectability politics in our society, it's dynamic and respectability really does look different depending on what culture it's sort of steeped in.
Of
In,
course.
in our culture, specifically, respectability was created with a white supremacist mindset because our country has a racist history and a white supremacist history
Absolutely.
and a white supremacist present, unfortunately, contemporarily, that these are things we deal with. And so what it does is respectability says we're going to pick a class of people, a community of people, and we're going to hold them as the ideal. And we're going to create a set of politics, a set of values, beliefs, behaviors that are force everyone who's not in that protected class to cater to that protected class by trying to conform as best as they can to emulate what I would call like historically included group of people. So in the US, that tends to look like cisgender, heterosexual, white men of affluence. But not just those. There are a lot of people who are almost there that get, depending on how close you are to that super protected and favored class, the more benefits you get. And so, why that's a problem is because for people of color and queer people and people who don't not just don't fit that, but are sort of the antithesis of those values. It says that like even though you represent the antithesis, we're going to force you to be as close to that as possible, and we're going to make your survival whole hang in the balance. So if you happen to speak with a vernacular that is different from the accepted one, if you happen to have dress or perform your gender in ways that are outside of the protected class, then then you know you have to do. We're going to make unemployment like a reality for you. We're going to make it so that the our society doesn't take you seriously and make sure you're erased from media. Or if you are in media, you're sort of parodized, like you're a parody in that.
Yeah.
And so the farther you are from that ideal, the harder and the more damaging it is to force you to conform. So like you're basically respectability politics asks you to put a triangular peg into a circular hole and says, well, maybe you just have to cut pieces of yourself off. And whatever you have to do to make it into this like ideal like access point, then and it's basic. It's put on us to figure out how to get there. And so, as somebody who is considers themselves very far from that ideal, it's harmful for me to have to perform in ways that are not made for me. They're made to harm me. And so yeah, that's my podcast is all about getting people together to let go of that or try our hardest because we can't do it in total. Like it's so ingrained in us that I want it to be sort of an exercise of leaning into the other extreme.
I love this. It also flows really well with the idea that as your identity changes, not just yours
Yes.
personally, all of ours, right? We evolve, we change, we grow, and we lean into that because you can't just wake up something you're not.
Yeah. Right. And respectability politics says you better. Like we know it's impossible, but you should really try to be someone
Right.
different tomorrow.
Otherwise, you're going to be punished.
Exactly, exactly. And that punishment can just be, it could be alienation. It could be something as simple as alienation, but go all the way up to actual physical and fatal violence, which in as a Black trans woman, that's a really big epidemic in my community. I'm 31 now. The red zone for being a Black trans woman in America is between the ages of 31 and 36, because that's when, if many of us are going to face violence or fatal violence, it will be between those 5 years, 31 and 36, statistically. Excuse me. So, as somebody who's 31, as of last August, I feel that much more motivated to subvert that statistic and lean into this sort of dangerous thing in hopes of making it less dangerous or to normalize it in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
I also like how you said before that, you're not looking to necessarily be a martyr for your cause, right? But
Right.
at the same time, one of the things, it's not being a martyr when it's threatening your entire existence.
Yeah.
And also I love the idea of being able to look at these really hard topics, and yet you're also, fighting the fight because it's going to make such a difference for not just others, but for yourself.
Yeah, it is selfish work. I tell people all the time, part of the reason why I don't want to be a martyr is because, like, I do want to elicit pleasure and success from my own work. I being a trailblazer sometimes means that you're blazing the trail so that you can get to a certain place, but you endure that trailblazing because people will follow behind you. So it may start off as something like a selfish impetus, but there's nothing wrong with that, because as queer people, living for yourself is actually rebellious and it is revolutionary, and creating a space that is for you that you can live in inherently creates space for other people. And so there's really no harm in, whatever reason calls you to do this work of trailblazing work. I mean, no matter what you do, it's revolutionary, because we're not supposed to even survive in this world because respectability politics are so intact, white supremacy is so intact. So,
right.
yeah.
I think this idea of it's basically also I think about this as kind of like, it is revolutionary to be yourself.
Yes.
Because selfish work isn't what we were ingrained as we were children and told, what it is to be selfish. Oh, you're self-centered. Selfish work benefits others.
Exactly.
If you let it, and if you make that also part of the goal.
Yeah, because that's what disrespectability is also does too, is it takes things like being selfish and it says, like, okay, technically this work is for yourself, and our society has a lot of negative connotations around being selfish and being self-centered, but like disrespectability says, hey, there's probably some value in that we could explore. It doesn't have to be all black and white. It doesn't have to be selfish means bad. Selfish could be really good for other people. You being yourself could tell other people it's okay to be themselves. And that's what I love about disrespectability. And one thing I try to make people understand is that being disrespectable is different than being disrespectful. Very different concepts.
I completely agree with you. And I think that this is the good work that you're doing is not necessarily going along with the way things were, because a lot of times the way things weren't the best way to do things.
No, and or at the very least, even if they were kind of created with the best intent, if you're not creating it with all forms of people at the table informing that idea, it will be so specific that the minute you try to scale that across an entire culture, it becomes toxic and problematic. That is the thing that I want to
kind of like the Constitution.
Or like, I think of things like, the partition of like Africa and all of these things. Like, how many times we as a society are so comfortable making decisions for broad, that have broad implications and cover so many types of people, but we don't sometimes even think to include the stakeholders in, I mean, not like it was an accident in the case of partition of Africa. That was very intentional, but we have a practice of doing that, especially in nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit can be it can be one of those entities that says like, hey, I'm going to go help the world and I'm going to do this without maybe asking first, hey, before I do this, is this something you need? And that's something I would love to see change in the nonprofit industrial complex, is us checking in and providing what people are asking for rather than what we project with our own experiences. Because what I need is very different than even what a trans masculine or trans man needs in our society. So I have no business making those decisions in a vacuum.
I think that this is the idea of, white saviorism,
Yes,
especially, right? This
yes,
whole idea of like, I'm going to go in and I'm going to help, and I'm not even going to ask who I can help. I'm just going to go help. And I think that there's a lot of the work that you do, whether you're doing activist work or you're even doing advocate work. And I know that there's an energy difference
for
between
sure.
two, but you are both. And I think that you can bring, that different kind of perspective in that it doesn't always have to include absolutely everybody, but it has to include who it's for.
Yeah, at the very least, that's what I wish I could tell people. Like you said it so like organically and easily, and it makes me angry because like it's not a hard concept, but apparently it is a concept people are struggling with. But like you were able to sum that up so beautifully, and it's sad that people can't internalize it or refusing to, for the most part.
Have you always done this work?
Kind of. I've always been so I grew up really poor, like really poor. I if I There's a drag queen out there named Trixie Mattel that I always resonate with because I've never heard someone um be as poor as I was, who had a similar childhood. Like I grew up with parents who were really struggling with addiction, and I lived in motels on like the Midlothian Turnpike. And I have a long history of being food insecure and housing insecure, and there were times when I didn't eat as a kid for days. And also dealing with navigating being a precocious child with not a lot of resources. Like I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to be someone people listen to. I wanted to be an influential person, despite having zero agency and zero resources growing up. And so, in a lot of ways, everything that I did to get myself closer to that dream was sort of what we were talking about. Was me doing selfish work. It was me trailblazing because as a kid who socialized as male, but was very effeminate. I was perceived. I am Black, and I consider myself Black, but I have a white parent, and so there's a lot of really interesting interactions that happened there. As a child who grew up in those circumstances and wanted to be more than that, everything I did was sort of like equity work or trailblazing work, just because I was not satisfied with my lot in life. And so that's what I want to tell like people out there. Like if you're somebody out there who is experiencing disenfranchisement and that's just not enough for you, and you do anything, even if you're dreaming in spite of that, you are doing the work that I claim to do. And so yeah, I mean, I really got into formal equity work through an organization called Virginia what is it? VCIC, Virginia, something for inclusive community, Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities.
I was going to say, we can always link it later.
There you go. Jonathan Zor runs that in Richmond, and people like Emma Yaxo, also amazing community people who run that. When I was in high school, I went to a summer camp, and they did like these really interesting like racial equity, like social experiments that really got me involved in understanding how to use my voice. And at that same time, I was already growing up queer and being, I was a 13-year-old with a tongue ring who was identified as male and Black, and so there were a lot of things that people did not see commonly, which was a Black effeminate male with a tongue ring who's fighting for justice, and wants and is interested in those things. And so I did get into it pretty early, but my life made it such that I had to do this work just to be just to survive, just to get out of those motels. Like, I mean, it took all of that, and I mean, I have so much lived experience. Like I tell people, I have 80 years of experience, like jam packed into 31 years of actual living.
I believe this. I believe this because I still remember the first time I met you.
Yeah.
And I remember this light that shone out of you, and it just took me aback. And one of the reasons why I love hearing about what it is you're doing and supporting what you're doing is because of the fervor that you support it. And I think that, so what the show is, it's called Be the Plan, right?
Yeah.
You have always been your own plan.
Yeah.
And to me, instead of, you've had so many different transformations,
Yeah.
and yet there is an undercurrent there. So normally I ask people about a transformation they've gone through, but I hear what you're saying to me too is, and to everyone is, there's always this undercurrent of Aurora that is blazing this trail for herself and others, because it's not just for you. And even I love that you include you, because that means that you think you're worth it. And
Right.
that to me is the biggest thing. But even if you didn't include you, it is, it's mind blowing to me, the work that you're doing for people. So I want to ask you, what has always been true about you?
Yeah. I've always been more interested in the world outside of myself than I have been the world inside of myself. I'm learning to balance that a little bit more. I think growing up with such hardship, I just immediately assumed that the world outside of me would be inherently more interesting and worthwhile than the world inside of myself.
You're pretty interesting. I don't know about that.
I appreciate that, and like it's hard because like I don't. In some ways, I do interest myself, and in other ways, I'm dying to connect with other people, and I'm dying to be a part of something that's outside of me. I want to. Yeah, and so I would say one thing, I've always been interested in how other people live their lives. I'm a language nerd, and I love linguistics, and I love learning other languages. And I studied anthropology and archaeology briefly before I transferred out of that institution, because I'm always interested in how people live their lives. Because I know one thing I've always known is that the way that I'm forced to live my life by my home culture or my macro culture is not the only way, and it is certainly not the best way. So there are people out there who are living lives that are inherently more efficient, more vibrant, more beautiful, more considerate, more eco-friendly, and more expansive than what I've been given access to. And I'm a collector of ideas and cultures and behaviors. Like I want to know what those things are because I want to build models of possibility for myself, and I want it to be kind of a messy process. Like I want to get it wrong sometimes because like in a way I'm sort of like a scientist in that like when I get something wrong I get excited because then it's unknowable. There's more to learn. And so yeah, there's always been an inherent curiosity about me that even when I transitioned 3 years ago, one of the first things I started doing was taking my curiosity and turning it inward as well. And I would do these like little short write-up narratives about like what character I was living that day, because in my transition, I realized I had the opportunity to be someone, not just someone, but some ones. Like I mean, being trans is so beautiful because there's almost nothing more radical in our society, and once you change this thing that was used to be presumed to be permanent and innate, once you change that, you get permission to change anything and everything else about you that you want. Your name, your whether or not you like olives. Like, these are things that they have a mental aspect and emotional aspect to it that can change your physical and material world too. And so I loved the idea of turning in on myself and figuring out, like, maybe I could be this person named Artemis, or maybe Aurora, or maybe uh I'm trying to think of another, Carmen, one of the characters I
Yes,
used
you
to.
had some amazing characters,
Thank
but
you.
what I loved watching about them wasn't necessarily the character,
Yeah,
right? I loved your backstories.
yeah,
What I loved was a real-time unfolding of you rescripting your own stories and
yeah,
telling the stories that could be true, but
yeah.
then living into the ones that are true.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for saying that, because like that's exactly I made sure to even put like almost superfluous and contradictory details things in there. Like one person
Which were
would be,
beautiful.
thank you, like it would be like she's a kickboxer but she is afraid of spiders, or like they have a twin sister but are nothing, things like that. Like, and I always sneak mythology into these like archetypes or these personas. And a lot of them, even my name Aurora comes from the Roman goddess of the dawn. And I do things like, and one of the characters was based on like Persephone, so you would see things like pomegranates and these little things in there, that so that no matter what, even when I was being someone else, I was being myself, because I am the sum total amalgamation of all of these possibilities. It just depends on the day which one I express.
I think the other thing that you showed people is that you can be one thing and another, and it never has to be an either or
Yeah,
choice.
yeah,
And that is what is so beautiful about how you approach not just your identity, but your work. I think that I would like to ask you about the thing that I wrote, and the thing that you wrote
yeah,
about being your own hero. So my question to you originally was, who are your heroes and who do you love?
yeah,
And your response was, my hero is my potential self,
yeah,
a projection that I am still striving for.
yeah.
And what I want you to maybe focus on is, how do you tell someone, or what would you tell someone who is looking for that hero and wants it to be themselves?
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you're taking that stance like I was, my thought process is that you inherently feel at odds with that projection currently. And so just know that like every day is like a small step towards that person, and like it's a moving target too, right? So because you don't know who that person is, every time you sort of think you do, you're sort of missing it a little bit, because that idea, that projection is not really meant to be like tangibly held. It sort of serves as the horizon, like that point that you never actually are supposed to touch, that drives you forward. And so I'm big on like horizons and dawns. Again, my namesake comes from that, because I want every day. When I transitioned, it saved my life, because it made my life inherently unknowable and something to strive for, as opposed to something I held and was no longer interested in because it was tangible and achieved. And like, I didn't. I love, Jose Esteban Munoz is an author that I love, that wrote Queer Utopia and talks about radical hope. And like, those are things that do keep me going. And so just know that like every day you're sort of figuring it out a little, and that every time you figure out a little bit, the target should move out of your aim just a little bit. You have to keep adjusting, because that's the only way you sort of figure out what fits. And like, that's okay. And we have to get very comfortable with the very queer notion of failure, which is actually not a failing at all. It's a constant recalibration and being at odds with the world, so that you're constantly accepting new stimuli and new information.
I just want everybody to rewind this about 3 minutes and listen to that whole thing again, because what I take away from that too is this is actually life advice for people for people, period.
Yes.
I'm just going to stop it there and say your life isn't necessarily handed to you. It is something that you are creating every single day. And what the horizon is,
Yeah.
the good part is it's not outcome oriented. We are
Right.
so taught to like, oh, you have to achieve this goal, achieve, do this, do that, do this.
Yeah.
And when you stop doing that,
Yeah.
the world really opens up to be the most beautiful, expansive place.
I think so. I mean, I've been affirmed in that, like, my life is really difficult. Right now, I'm still in transition, both like with my gender, but I, I'm, I'm finally at a place now where I actually am really afraid of what is going to happen next because I don't know what's going on, and there's so much that I want to do that I feel like I'm not given the opportunity to do right now. And so to answer one of your other questions, which is like, what's a transition that's changed you, is like, I'm kind of going through one right now. I've coming out of this strike, and there's, like, implications with that. But I also now realize, like, I want to do more. I want to manage myself, and I want to do things like this as like my full-time work, and I want to create media out there, and I want to get my thoughts out there because I do think that they could be helpful. And like you said, it's not just about being trans. I've had cisgender women come up to me a couple of times and say, hey, I've been thinking about changing my name, because one person in particular came from a really hardcore fundamentalist background, and she felt like her identity and her name were given to her, and she didn't have a lot of agency around it. And so just out of us talking, she actually went through with legally changing her first name, and it's the first step. There's so many first steps. That's not the only one, but that was a step that they took to take control of their narrative again. And they're not trans, they're not queer, but queer people are showing the rest of the world that reality is not as rigid as we've been taught it is, and that one of the most beautiful contributions that queer people of color can lend to everyone out there, is that you can take control of your life and change your narrative. Because if I can do it and face all of the social backlash that I face, I even think about how my voice, the gender of how my voice will be perceived on just this podcast, because that was something I grappled with in previous podcasts. But I think it's important that people hear my voice and know that having a gender ambiguous, like, pitch or tone in your voice or timbre, whatever, we need to normalize it. These exist out there. And so I hope that cis people and people out there in the world see what amazing contribution queer and queer people of color can have on them in their lives. It's not outside of you all. You have a direct stake in us surviving as well.
Absolutely. And I love that you initiated this invitation for everyone to examine their own story that they have told themselves, because most cisgendered folks obviously have no repercussions like what you have faced.
Yeah.
And if you can go through the things that you have gone through, why can't we change an aspect of our lives?
Yeah.
That is a beautiful thought, Aurora. I you have such an eloquent way of saying things. I love this about you.
Well, thank you. It really does. I mean, again, being trans means that I've been forced to learn a lot of things I didn't even want to learn. And I wish I didn't have to pay the price for certain learnings, but
same here.
It means something. And I hope if people can take away from it, then it will be that much more worth it for me.
So where can people follow your journey as you continue to voice your brilliance and your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm out in the streets doing work. And I want people to know that I want people to reach out to me. And I posted something I'm embarrassed to say this because it hints at a personal ask, but I do think it is important for people
Please.
to know this.
How can we support you? Tell us.
instead of sending people your thoughts and prayers, send us job opportunities. Talk to your organization's board about having us come and being speakers, paid speakers. Stop expecting Black femmes and Black people, people of color, queer people to work for free. I literally just said no to a free gig, and I've never really done that before, and I felt horrible. But at the end of the day, if you're not paying people and you're exploiting their labor, I mean, you're using their labor that is exploitative. And when you look at the idea that we already live such highly exploitable lives anyway, you're just sort of adding to that, and it's not a drop in the bucket. I mean, I want people visit me on my website, aurorahiggs.com. Reach out to me. I would love to come talk to your org, and I do a lot of keynote speaking, and that's something I love doing. Like, I love being able to make a difference and have my words resonate with people that maybe I would never have seen myself being able to have access to before. So come find me, check me out on my socials, check out my website, hire me to speak, and hire other Black trans people and other people outside of the margins. After, it's great for me to come and talk to people, but when I'm done, you should continue it's not just about me. I'm just one individual that I am.
And it's not just one and done.
No, it's not. Pride, I tell people Pride should be 365. Like and Pride is not just LGBT Pride, it's Black Pride, it's all of these things. We should not be relegated to these little hot spots when everyone remembers that we exist all of a sudden and is like trying to knock down our doors for comments and to do things. And then the rest of the 11 months, it's like crickets. That's not okay.
Right.
And it's exploitative. So
yes,
we got to do better. I'm willing to help you do better too. Come hire me.
And I love that. And I know that you've got a lot of different ways that you can help people. Like you said, speaking, you can consult, you can help build advocacy programs. You've got Aurora basically knows how to do some stuff, people, is all I'm saying.
Look, I love learning how to do new things. So if there's something I don't know how to do, I will learn it. If there's a language out there I don't have competency in, I will learn it. But I also do things like sensitivity reads and, for productions and writings and things like that. So we as trans people, we are inherently talented in ways that society has yet to acknowledge. So that's where I'll leave that.
That sounds perfect. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am going to link a whole bunch of things when we get this show up and ready to go. I think we're going to have a follow-up at some point. I
would love to.
I love chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining me and for being here, and we will talk soon.
All right. Thank you so much. And one last pitch. If you want to get merch like this Protect Black Trans Femme t-shirt, you can check out my Etsy store at Aurora's Window. And also check out the Disrespectable Brunch IG page.
We'll link to it.
Yeah, at Disrespectable Brunch. And those episodes are being recorded now, so there's not really much on there, but it's coming. So follow us and
subscribe, follow, click the button, do all the things.
Do the bell, come support your girl Aurora. So thank you all so much, and I can't wait to talk to you. I hope I get to talk to you, Michelle, and I hope I get to talk to you out there, listener. So
thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining me today. Go ahead and like and leave me a comment. I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you don't want to miss anything, click that subscribe button.